Have you ever looked at someone incredibly successful? A tech billionaire, a world-class athlete, a rock star, and just wondered how on earth did they do that? We love the story of the self-made hero, the lone genius who, through sheer talent and willpower, pulls themselves up from nothing to achieve greatness. It's a powerful and inspiring narrative. But what if it's not the whole story? What if the most important factors for success are things we barely ever notice? In his fascinating book, Outliers, The Story of Success, author Malcolm Gladwell takes a sledgehammer to that classic idea. He argues that if we want to truly understand what makes some people exceptional, what makes them outliers, we need to stop looking so much at the person themselves. Instead, we need to look around them. We need to look at their family, their birthplace, and even their birth date. Because according to Gladwell, extraordinary success is not just about individual merit. It's a product of hidden advantages, lucky breaks, and cultural legacies that give some people a head start that others simply don't have. The real story of success is far more complex and, frankly, far more interesting than we've been led to believe. Gladwell starts with a puzzle that seems almost absurd. In the world of elite Canadian hockey, is there a secret to getting to the top? Yes, and it has nothing to do with talent. It has to do with being born in the first 3 months of the year. It sounds crazy, but the data is undeniable. If you look at the rosters of Canada's top junior hockey teams, you'll find that a huge number of players were born in January, February, or March. Very few were born in October, November, or December. Why? Because the eligibility cutoff for age-class hockey in Canada is January 1st. So when kids start playing at age 6 or 7, a boy born on January 2nd is playing against a boy who might not turn 7 until the end of December. At that age, a nearly 12-month age gap is a massive physical advantage. The January baby is bigger, stronger, and more coordinated. So who gets identified as the talented one? Who gets picked for the elite travel teams? The older kid. And once they're on that elite track, they get better coaching, more ice time, and more games against better competition. Their small initial advantage compounds year after year until by the time they're teenagers, they really are better. Gladwell calls this phenomenon the Matthew effect, from a verse in the Bible. For unto everyone that hath, more shall be given. It's a perfect example of how a seemingly arbitrary rule can create a system of success that has little to do with innate ability. This idea of compounding advantage leads to one of Gladwell's most famous concepts, the 10,000-hour rule. The idea is that true expertise in any field requires about 10,000 hours of dedicated practice. But the key insight isn't just that practice makes perfect. It's that very few people ever get the opportunity to put in those hours. Think about the Beatles. Before they invaded America and became the most famous band in history, they were a scruffy high school rock and roll group from Liverpool. What turned them into legends? An opportunity that no other band had. In the early 1960s, they were invited to play in the strip clubs of Hamburg, Germany. The clubs demanded they play long, grueling sets. They would play for 8 hours a night, 7 days a week. By the time they left Hamburg, they had performed live an estimated 1,200 times. Most bands don't play that much in their entire career. They weren't just talented, they had a unique chance to put in their 10,000 hours before anyone even knew their names. This intense period of practice transformed them from a decent band into a transcendent one. Or take Bill Gates. We think of him as a brilliant visionary who dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft. And he is. But his story is also one of incredible, unrepeatable opportunity. Bill Gates grew up in a wealthy family in Seattle and attended an elite private school. In 1968, this school was one of the only high schools in the entire world to have a computer terminal.
While everyone else was still learning about computers from books, a teenage Bill Gates was getting real-time programming experience. He and his friends could spend endless hours learning to code, making mistakes, and mastering the machine. He had access that was almost unheard of. By the time he dropped out of Harvard, he already had well over his 10,000 hours of programming under his belt. Gladwell points out that the perfect birth year for a software tycoon was around 1955. It meant you were old enough to take advantage of the dawn of the personal computer revolution, but not so old that your mind was already set in its ways. Bill Gates was born in 1955. So was Steve Jobs. Their success wasn't just about their genius, it was about their timing. They were given a chance that almost no one else had. But Gladwell's analysis goes even deeper than opportunities in practice. He argues that our success is also profoundly shaped by our cultural legacy, the attitudes, beliefs, and traditions passed down to us from our ancestors. This is perhaps the most mind-bending part of the book, and he illustrates it with a chilling life-and-death example, the story of Korean Air. For a period in the late 1990s, Korean Air had one of the worst crash records in the developed world. The planes were state-of-the-art, the pilots were highly trained and experienced. On paper, nothing made sense. The problem, as investigators eventually discovered, was not in the machinery, but in the cockpit. It was cultural. In every culture, there's a concept sociologists call the power distance index. It's a measure of how much a particular culture values and respects authority. The United States has a low power distance index. If an American co-pilot sees the captain making a mistake, they're likely to say, "Hey, I think you're flying too low." They'll be direct. Korea, on the other hand, has a very high power distance index. It's a culture where you do not directly challenge your superiors. So in a Korean Air cockpit, a co-pilot who noticed a dangerous error wouldn't say it directly. They would hint. They might say, "Captain, the weather seems a bit poor." They would be deferential and indirect, even in the face of mortal danger. Tragically, this cultural tendency was identified as a key factor in several crashes where co-pilots knew something was wrong but failed to communicate their concerns forcefully enough to avert disaster. So what was the solution? Korean Air brought in a consultant from Delta Airlines that made a radical change. They mandated that the official language of the cockpit had to be English. Why? Because English, as a language, has a lower power distance built into it. It forced the pilots to break out of their cultural norms of deference and adopt a more direct, assertive style of communication. The change worked almost overnight. Korean Air's safety record is now impeccable. It's a stunning example of how a hidden cultural legacy, something we're not even conscious of, can shape our ability to succeed in high-stakes situations. So, after all this, what are we supposed to take away from Outliers? It's not a message of helplessness, that our fate is sealed by our birthday or our background. It's actually a message of hope and understanding. It asks us to look at our own lives and recognize the hidden advantages we might have had. The supportive parents, the great teacher, the lucky break. Success is never achieved alone. It's also a call for empathy. When we see someone who is wildly successful, we shouldn't just feel awe for their individual brilliance. We should ask, what was their Hamburg? What was their special computer club? Who were the people and what were the circumstances that gave them the chance to flourish? And most importantly, it gives us a new way to think about building a better world. If success is the result of accumulated advantages, then we can create more success by spreading those advantages around. We can change the arbitrary cutoff dates. We can create more opportunities for everyone to get their 10,000 hours. We can become more aware of our cultural legacies and how they help or hinder us. The story of the outlier isn't a story about one person's triumph. It's a story about community, history, and opportunity. It reminds us that success isn't just earned. It is in many ways a gift. And outliers are simply those who have been given the chance and the strength to make the most of it.